So Damn Lucky. The Lucky O'Toole Vegas Adventure Series, Book 3. By Deborah Coonts. Narrated for you by Patricia Santamasso. Chapter 1. Some things in life are best savored alone. Sex is not one of them. This happy thought occurred to me while piloting a borrowed Ferrari and staring at the smiling couples filling the sidewalks along the Las Vegas Strip. Walking hand in hand, they were living, breathing reminders of the sorry state of my own love life. "Lady, watch out!" I heard the shout in the nick of time. Slamming on the brakes, I narrowly avoided sliding the front end of the Ferrari under a tour bus. A sea of Japanese faces appeared like moons in the back window, peering down at me. Then cameras blocked the faces, flashbulbs popping as I shrugged and waved while trying to appear unruffled. The young man who had shouted stepped over to the car and peered through the open roof, like a judge eyeing the accused. "Are you okay?" he asked. His face flushed, his eyes glassy. He looked like he was still recovering from last night's party, or getting a head start on the next one. "Thanks to you," I said as I restarted the car, which had stalled. "I know better than to think about sex while doing something potentially life-threatening. What was I thinking?" I cringed as the words popped out of my mouth. Even I couldn't believe I'd said that. Clearly, I needed to get a grip. First, I couldn't stop thinking about sex. Now I was talking about it to strangers. This was so not good. "What were you thinking?" The kid smirked at me as he took another gulp from the glass clutched tightly in his hand. "Care to enlighten me?" he asked after wiping his mouth on the sleeve of his sweatshirt, which had NYU printed in bold blue on the front. The sweatshirt looked new. He looked 12. I felt old. "Another time, perhaps," I lied. I didn't really intend to flirt with the kid. However, with Teddie, my former live-in, gallivanting around the globe playing rock star for the last 6 weeks, and the foreseeable future, my prospects looked pretty dim. Teddie and I had been really good for a while. Now, I didn't know what we were. Sexual self-preservation clearly had kicked in. "Go easy on those walktails," I said. "They're deadly, and the night is still young." It was a blatant attempt to steer the conversation away from the current topic. "Walktail?" "That drink in your hand. Small enough to take with you, but potent enough to leave you puking in the gutter." The kid's face grew serious as he held up the brew for inspection, looking at it with a newfound respect. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice filled with awe. My smile vanished. Despite careful study, I was still unable to figure out at precisely what moment in time I had gone from being a miss to a ma'am. What changed? Whatever it was, I wanted it back like it used to be, along with a few other things, but they would all take minor miracles. While I believe in magic, miracles were pushing the envelope, even for me. I squeezed the pedal shifter and put the car in gear. Easing around the still stationary bus, I hit the gas. The night held an October chill, refreshing as the wind teased my hair. A full moon fought a losing battle as it competed valiantly with the lights of the Strip. I knew stars filled the sky, but they weren't visible in the false half-night of Las Vegas at full wattage. My name is Lucky O'Toole, and, as I mentioned, the Ferrari isn't mine. It belongs to the dealership at the Babylon, my employer, and the newest addition to the Las Vegas Strip mega-resort explosion. By title, I am the head of customer relations. In reality, I'm the chief problem solver. If a guest at the Babylon has a situation, which could be anything from an unplanned marriage, an unfamiliar bed partner, a roaring headache, or an unexplained rash to a wife and kids given a room on the same floor as the mistress's suite, I'm the go-to girl. Lucky me. Actually, I love my job, and I miss Teddie. As the two appear mutually exclusive, therein lies the rub. But enough of that. I had wallowed in self-pity for my allotted 10 minutes today. No more private pity party for me. I was on my way to the real thing. The invitation read, inviting all family, friends, and former dancers to a farewell party in honor of the 40-year run of the Calliope Burlesque Cabaret. October 26th, 8 o'clock sharp. Backstage at the Calliope Theater, the Athena Resort and Casino. Present this invitation for admittance. To someone in my position, being invited to parties was part of the exercise, but this was one guest list on which I never expected to find my name. I wasn't family, nor was I a former dancer, although with my 6-foot frame, I guess dancing might have been a career path had I not been averse to prancing in front of strangers wearing nothing but stilettos and a thong, with 20 pounds of feathers on my head. That left friend. As the sole individual responsible for shutting down the show, I doubted I qualified under that category either. Perhaps they invited me because of my unparalleled ability to smooth ruffled feathers, or maybe for my irritating inability to overlook a pun, no matter how tortured. Who knew? However, I never could resist a good mystery, so despite the niggling feeling I'd received an invitation to my own execution, I accepted. After having to go back to the office for the invitation, and after the near miss on the strip, I pulled the Ferrari up to the front of the Athena. Careful to extricate myself from the low-slung car without giving the valet an eyeful at my short skirt, I then tossed the keys to him. Wrapping myself in a warm hug of cashmere pashmina to ward off the night chill, I straightened my skirt, threw back my shoulders, found a tentative balance on 4-inch heels, and headed inside. An aging grande dame, the Athena had seen better days. Like a ship marooned on the shoals, torn and tattered by the elements, the Athena had been savaged by time and inattention. Moored at the wrong end of the strip, surrounded by lesser properties, she now boasted only faded glory. Her carpet stained, her walls dingy, and her decor dated, she reeked of quiet desperation. While she still boasted the best seafood buffet in Vegas for less than $20, which brought in some of the locals, her gaming rooms were rarely more than a third full. In Vegas, folks are quick to abandon a sinking ship, even if the slots are loose and the staff friendly. My boss, Albert Rothstein, also known as the Big Boss, recently acquired the Athena from the previous owner, who had decided the best way to beat the Big Boss was to frame him for murder. In a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, the Big Boss had eaten the canary, with my help, I'm happy to say. The fact that the Big Boss is also my father is a closely guarded secret. So close that even I was in the dark until recently, when, facing the prospect of imminent death at the hands of a heart surgeon, the Big Boss decided to come clean. I'm still not sure how I felt about the whole thing, so I ignored it whenever possible. I was pretty happy with the way things were before the big bombshell, so I didn't see any reason to rock the boat. The Big Boss saw it differently. Now that he'd claimed me and made his relationship with my mother public, he wanted the whole world to know. Not a hooker's chance in heaven, thank you very much. Don't get me wrong, I loved him like a father, always had. But who the heck wants to be the boss's daughter? Expecting the usual sparse crowd, I was surprised to see a throng milling about the Athena's dismal lobby and spilling into the casino. Having spent my formative years in and out of Vegas hotels and my adult life working in them, I rarely noticed the fashion choices of the river of humanity that flowed through. However, tonight, their choices were hard to ignore. Space creatures of all shapes and sizes mingled, giving each other the Vulcan sign of greeting. It was like the Star Trek experience at the Hilton used to be, but better. While I'm not that well versed in aliens, I thought I recognized a couple of Klingons, a Romulan or two, multiple Ferengi, and a collective of Borg. As the Borg passed, their faces impassive, I thought about saying, "Resistance is futile," but I stifled myself. The whole thing made me realize how much I missed the Hilton's hokey institution. When they shuttered Quarks, the Hilton had closed a whole chapter of my youth. Strange new worlds must be explored, I guess. Scattered among the trekkers, they'd been Trekkies when I was young, but one vehement Klingon had corrected me, and I was not one to argue with an angry Klingon. were little green men, bubble-headed aliens of 1950s movie fantasy, a Wookiee or two, other wild Star Wars imaginings, and several truly original creations. Some of the aliens were even disguised as humans, one of whom I recognized. Junior Arbogast, hoax exposer, fraud buster, and legend in his own mind, made his living debunking UFO sightings, alien abductions, and paranormal phenomena in general. Junior and I had bonded over an interesting outing to Area 51, the local Air Force spook palace north of town, and the epicenter of UFO lore. He had spent an hour face down in the dirt, a gun pointed at his head, while I endeavored to talk the Lincoln County Sheriff out of arresting him, and the camo guys, as the security service hired to protect and defend the perimeter were so lovingly referred to, from perforating him. Now, each year when the Spookies held their annual convention in town, Junior and I usually found time to have a drink together, which I enjoyed. Yes, he could be arrogant and a pain in the ass, but he was bright and knew BS when he saw it. I liked that about him. Built like a fire hydrant, with a shock of wiry dishwater blonde hair, pale eyes under heavy, bushy brows, and a nose that had been broken more than once, Junior loved a good fight, the product of a childhood in the mountains of West Virginia. He didn't tolerate fools well, so he had few friends, a fact that didn't seem to bother him. How I managed to stay off his blithering idiot list was an enduring mystery. Are you merely observing the mating rituals of alien life forms, or are you looking for the next Mrs. Arbogast? I whispered as I sidled in next to him. Ah, the great quipster, Lucky O'Toole. I was wondering when you'd turn up. Junior mumbled through a mouthful of hot dog. He swallowed, then took a healthy swig from his gallon-sized bucket o' beer. You jest, but I'll have you know, he continued, a renowned professor at one of this country's most storied institutions of higher learning postulated that all alien abductions around the world could be explained as a simple cross-species breeding project. So, everything really is about sex? Especially in Vegas. If sex doesn't happen here, why come? Junior stuffed in the last of his hot dog and washed it down with more beer. Why indeed, I thought, as I watched the UFO aficionados, some true believers, but mostly half-baked hangers-on who liked a good party with a weird group of folks. I could identify. I lived there. People and aliens packed in around us, their energy infectious. A television crew trailed one of the local talking heads, apparently on the prowl for content for a wacky and wonderful segment for the nightly news. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something. What's going on? I asked Junior, since he appeared to be waiting as well. We're all about to witness a spectacular example of professional suicide. Really? Whose? I felt the inner flicker of some primal calling, probably the same unsavory instinct that draws us all to the scene of disaster. I didn't like it. Dr. Zwicky. Ah, I said, not needing any more explanation. Zoom Zoom Zwicky had been a train wreck waiting to happen for years. A former astronaut and the 20th-something man launched into space, with a PhD in some obscure science from one of the world's foremost universities. Zoom Zoom had one major affliction. He used to be somebody. In recent years, he had resorted to quirkier and more outlandish stunts to make sure we all remembered that. This must be my lucky day. First I get to witness professional suicide, then I get to preside at a funeral. My, you're a glutton for punishment. Junior wadded up the paper wrapper from his hot dog and stuffed it in his pocket. That will be my epitaph, I said, only half joking. I'm sure taking punishment is part of my job description, but, fool that I am, I didn't read the fine print. So, what treat does Zoom Zoom have in store for us? I glanced at my watch, 8:15. Fashionably late to the party, I still had a few more minutes before my tardiness would be considered another salvo in my one-man war on the Calliope girls. The war was a figment of their imaginations, of course, but I didn't want to toss any unnecessary grenades. Before Junior had time to answer, a hush fell over the crowd. Heads turned as Zoom Zoom stepped to a podium on a dais at the far end of the lobby. A short man who kept himself fighting trim, Dr. Zawicki wore his hair military short, his shirts pressed, his slacks creased, and had a look of encroaching madness in his dark eyes. He leaned into the microphone, got too close, then drew back with a jerk as if the resulting squeal was from a snake coiled to strike.
"Thank you all for coming."
This time he got the distance to the mic just right. His unexpectedly deep voice echoed around the marble lobby and rippled over the crowd. He waited until the last reverberation died before continuing.
"My statement will be brief, and I won't accept any questions at this time. For those of you who wish to know more, I will be holding a formal presentation Thursday night in Rachel as part of viewing night."
Expectant murmurs rolled like waves through the crowd. Dr. Zawicki fed on the attention of the crowd like an alien spacecraft sucking electromagnetic energy from a thunderstorm. Pausing, he milked it, then waiting a few beats more until every head turned his direction, every voice quieted. Staring at the crowd, a serious expression on his face, he pulled himself to his full height and announced,
"I have recently experienced an alien abduction."
The murmurs of the crowd rose on a cresting wave of expectation.
"My abductor's message is simple and twofold. When we die, they come and take our spirits. Some spirits pass through to the next life, but those of us with unresolved issues, those who were murdered perhaps, live on with the aliens. And now they wish to open a channel."
The wave of expectation broke into a cascade of excited voices, flooding the lobby with a rushing torrent of questions. Questions that would remain unanswered. Zoom Zoom Zawicki had left the stage. Stunned, I needed a few moments to find my voice. Did he just say what I thought he said?
"Tortured souls live on with the aliens, and Dr. Zawicki can talk to them."
I'm sure the homicide division at Metro will be thrilled to have alien assistance. I shrugged off a chill that shivered down my spine. Talk of murder messed with the Vegas magic that was part of my job to deliver. Junior looked at me, his face inscrutable.
"Talk about a meteor hitting the atmosphere. A lifetime of achievement incinerated, just like that."
He snapped his fingers in front of my face. "The death of a star," I whispered.
"And the birth of a pop culture icon,"
announced Junior, his voice as hard as flint. Zoom Zoom Zawicki had just pegged the fraudbusters' bullshit meter. I left Junior plotting the pulverization of the last remaining pebbles of Dr. Zawicki's reputation and headed toward the Calliope Burlesque Theater on the far side of the casino. Working my way through the throng had taken me longer than I anticipated. I had just reached the edge of the crowd when I felt a hand on my arm.
"Miss O'Toole?"
Young and soft, the voice was unfamiliar. "Yes?" I turned and found myself staring down at a blue-eyed Ferengi. The alien thrust an upside-down top hat at me.
"Would you be so kind as to deliver this to Mr. Fortunoff? He left it in the bar. Normally I would take it to him myself, but security is not allowing anyone backstage except those invited to the party."
"Sure." I grabbed the hat, surprised by its weight, as the Ferengi melted back into the crowd. That a magician would need a top hat to pull something out of seemed logical to me, so I didn't think the request odd. I peered inside the hat. Empty. Turning it right side up and shaking, nothing fell out. Whatever. A lesser luminary in the world of the dark arts, Dimitri Fortunoff specialized in sleights of hand, mind reading, and other parlor tricks. He performed nightly as the entertainment between the first and second acts of the burlesque show. I tucked the hat under my arm and strode through the casino. Flashing my invite to the security guard, I pushed through the double doors into another world. While decorations and scenery adorned the audience side of the curtain, creating the illusion of a bright and exciting world. A different, workmanlike world existed behind the curtain. The stage was empty, illuminated by bare bulbs that would be extinguished during the show. Scenery hung in the rafters on counterweighted pulleys. Other accoutrements, including Dimitri's magic tricks, were stuffed unceremoniously into every nook and cranny, creating an obstacle course for the unwary. At the appropriate time during the show, each piece would be moved into position. After its use, it would be removed in a well-choreographed, painstakingly rehearsed dance. 40 years of dust and grime, 40 years of pain and sweat, 40 years of hopes and dreams, 40 years of Vegas history, and I had swept it all away with the stroke of a pen. A matter of dollars and cents, the decision had been easy to make. Living with it, however, was a different matter. Extraordinarily tall, beautiful women in heavy makeup and little else dotted the backstage area, each encircled by friends, family, and adoring fans clever enough to talk their way in. I noticed Zoom Zoom Zawicki orbiting Gigi Vacheron, the star of the show. No wonder he had disappeared from the stage so quickly. Shorter women in costume also hosted clusters of partiers. The show photographer darted in and out, memorializing the event for posterity. Everyone talked in hushed voices. If anyone smiled, I missed it. The few men who danced in the show weren't visible. Neither was Dimitri Fortunoff. Nobody's eyes met mine as I gently pushed my way through the crowd. However, I felt the daggers hurled at my back, and I didn't really blame them. In their shoes, I'd hate me too. I found my conjurer in his dressing room, hiding from reality. "Well, if it isn't the Grim Reaper," he growled when he noticed me filling his doorway. "Did you come to gloat, or are you just slumming?" A tall man with a barrel chest, droopy features, hangdog eyes, and a turned-down mouth, dressed in a poorly fitting tux. Fortunoff looked more like an undertaker than an entertainer. Slumped in a chair, one leg crossed over the other, a plate balanced in his lap, he eyed me as he forked in a bite of chocolate cake with one hand. The fingers of his free hand worked a coin over and under, from thumb to pinky, then back again. A number of plastic glasses dotted the desk and shelves. Plates with partially eaten cake stuffed the small trash can in the corner. "Looks like you've had a party." "Awake." "The world moves on, Dimitri." Mesmerized, I watched the coin dance between his fingers. "The big boss is spending millions refurbishing this place, turning it into Las Vegas's first eco-friendly, totally green hotel." "Eco-friendly, in a town known for depleting all the available local natural resources. An interesting concept." "We like to appear to do our part." "An illusion." "You should know," I fired back. "Besides, I've heard you've moved on." "Yeah? How so?" "Rumor has it you're the masked Houdini." A magician who hid his identity while exposing famous illusions for a national television audience, the masked Houdini had aroused the ire of illusionists far and wide. In fact, when we announced he would be doing the Houdini seance on Halloween, several death threats had appeared in my office, some for me, some for the Houdini. The police were unable to trace the notes, but we'd heightened security as a precaution. "The rumor is just that, a rumor, no truth to it," Dimitri intoned. His eyes held mine briefly, then skittered away. "Right. Truth or not, somebody obviously believes it. I wouldn't take the threats lightly." This was old ground for us, but I felt the need to cover it once more. "I'm touched by your concern." I might have imagined it, but I thought I caught a glimpse of a grin lift one corner of his mouth, then vanish. "Don't let it go to your head," I said. "I'm just covering my ass. If the masked Houdini doesn't show up on Halloween, I'm toast." This time I was sure I saw a smile. "Did you bring me a present?" Dimitri tilted his head toward the hat under my arm. "Not me," I said as I thrust it at him. "A Ferengi." Dimitri raised an eyebrow. "Don't ask. The UFO folks." I trailed off, figuring that was enough of an explanation. He took the hat. His brows creased into a frown when he felt the weight. Reaching in, he pulled out, of all things, a rabbit, surprising us both. "Cute, but trite, don't you think?" he scoffed. Snow white, his black nose flaring excitedly, the poor creature looked terrified. Reaching to pet it, I noticed something tied to its dainty, jeweled collar. A note. I unfurled it, and my blood ran cold. In red lipstick, someone had scrawled, "Dimitri Fortunoff must die." Dimitri paled. He dropped the rabbit as he fell back in his chair, grabbing at the bow tie knotted around his neck. I snagged the bunny just before it hit the floor. "Water. I need water." Dimitri's face was now turning crimson. "I can't breathe." "Molly!" I screamed, shouting for Dimitri's assistant as I put down the bunny. She hadn't been in her cubicle when I'd walked by earlier, but she had to be close by. "Molly!" I knelt by Dimitri and managed to get his tie unknotted and his collar loosened. I was opening my mouth to shout again when the girl materialized in the doorway. "What happened?" Molly asked, looking flustered and out of breath. Trim and sturdy, she had an athlete's body and an efficient manner. Her dark hair was cut in layers and styled to look unkempt. Concern clouded her brilliantly blue eyes as she looked first at Dimitri, then to me, then back again. "He's just had a shock. Get some water, would you?" Dimitri gulped air. When Molly returned with water, he gulped that too. His normal coloring slowly returned, and his breathing settled back to a steady pace until a sheen of sweat was the sole remaining evidence of his panic attack. "Are you okay?" I asked, when I thought he could answer. "Fine." He pushed himself upright in the chair and set about retying his tie. "Well, as fine as anyone could be after having their life threatened." I sat back on my heels, my knees pressed together. "I found using Thumper as a delivery vehicle particularly menacing, didn't you?" He gave me a sneer. Molly hid her smile behind a dainty hand. I pushed myself to my feet, then realized the bunny was nowhere to be found. He had escaped in the commotion. "Molly, you better go find that rabbit. He'd certainly liven up the show, but I'm in enough trouble with the girls already." She glanced at the magician, then bolted. "Do you want to cancel tonight's show?" I asked, turning my attention to Dimitri. "We really should call the police." "And then what?" Dimitri mopped his brow with a multicolored scarf, then tucked it back up his sleeve. "All the other threats have been false alarms, and the police have found nothing." "You have a point. They haven't been successful with the notes delivered to my office addressed to the fool who hired the masked Houdini, which, by the way, would be me. I've increased security. I don't know what else to do." "You're getting notes too?" "Just lucky, I guess." Hands on my hips, I tried to look stern. "Seriously, I think you should cancel the show." "No." Dimitri looked adamant. "The show must go on." He didn't smile, so I don't think he meant that as a joke. "Well then, come on." Grabbing Dimitri's hand, I gave him a tug. Neither of us was particularly eager to cancel the final performance in a 40-year run. "This is your swan song. Make the most of it." "I wish you hadn't put it quite like that." "You'll be in front of a packed house," I said as I brushed myself off, then straightened his tie. What could possibly happen? The mood in the front of the house was even more somber than backstage, if that was possible. Patrons filed into the theater, the most important among them following the ushers to long, communal tables placed perpendicular to the stage that sat 6 per side. Guests of lesser importance were left to fend for themselves. If any of them wanted a beverage of choice, they had to get it themselves at the bar window on the left side of the theater, the queue for which had already snaked halfway across the large room. Statuesque women greeted each other with hugs and air kisses. Some cried while their escorts shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Nobody smiled when they looked in my direction. I felt like a creep. Unaccustomed to being in the midst of so much hostility, for a moment I was flummoxed. Casting my eyes around the room, I finally spied a safe haven, a small gaggle of elite magicians. Purportedly the members of the Magic Ring, a secret ruling society within the mystical arts community. I had checked them into the Babylon yesterday and taken charge of their VIP stay. "Mr. Mortimer," I greeted the man who had made all the arrangements for the group. "How are you enjoying Vegas so far?"
"It's been lovely, thank you," Mr. Mortimer said, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. "And this show is a particular treat." A short man, almost as big around as he was tall, Mr. Mortimer had dancing eyes and a quick smile. A ring of snow-white hair circled his otherwise bald head. The buttons of the silk vest stretching across his blossoming midsection looked ready to burst, but he appeared unconcerned. "We were so sorry to hear the show was closing," he continued, clearly unaware he was talking to the harbinger of death. "It's one of our favorites, a Vegas institution."
"Where are you sitting?" I asked. He consulted his ticket.
"Table 7.
"Me as well. May I show you the way?" We worked our way down to the front and took our seats as the lights dimmed and the orchestra played the first chords of a lilting tune. The curtain parted, and the company of clothed dancers, male and female, took the stage in a rousing cabaret number. The audience, many of whom were former dancers, whistled and clapped for their compatriots. When the topless ladies, or the nudes as they are referred to in the business, sashayed onto the stage, the admiration of the audience grew louder. Some of the women smiled, but most stayed in character. Despite having seen my share, topless shows remained a mystery to me. First, the women weren't even buxom. With the shortest of them measured at 5'10", and none of them weighing more than 130 pounds, how much bust could they be expected to have? Of course, my initial expectation had been they would all have been enhanced like most of the strippers in town, but that was not the case. A sort of weird reverse discrimination prevailed in Vegas. The very best showgirls had to be au naturel. I bet those women's boobs were the only natural things left in town. Heck, even the grass outside the Wynn was plastic. Wishing I had taken time to wait in line for a drink, but worried I might not have lived through it, I sat back, tried to relax, and watched the show. At the completion of several rousing dance numbers, each punctuated by the appearance of the nudes, the curtain fell on the first act. After a brief moment, the curtain again parted. The scenery had disappeared. A large rectangular wooden crate resembling a phone booth with a glass front and sides stood vertically in the center of the stage. Shiny brass angles attached along the edges with neat rows of rivets held the box together. Although it was hard to tell, I thought the crate was full of water. Mr. Mortimer and his friends gasped in unison. Leaning over, he whispered in my ear, "That's Houdini's Chinese water torture cell." "Houdini? Like Harry Houdini?" Mr. Mortimer nodded.
"I can't imagine where Dimitri got it."
Our eyes shot back to the stage as Dimitri Fortunoff appeared, clad only in old-fashioned swimming attire. Molly and several of the dancers accompanied him. The magician waved to someone off stage, then glanced up as a block and tackle descended from the rafters. It bore a wooden plank, cut with 2 round holes.
"Is this part of his normal act?"
one of Mr. Mortimer's compatriots asked. "Not as of a month ago," I replied, a ball of dread growing in my stomach.
"Ladies and gentlemen," Dimitri began, "as you all know, tonight is our last show, and I've been perfecting a special escape for you."
When he paused, you could hear a pin drop.
Harry Houdini, widely considered the best of all time, developed the escape I am about to do for you. First, my ankles will be placed in this stock.
Dimitri held up the wooden board and removed an open padlock, which released the 2 halves, allowing it to be positioned around his legs. An assistant then bent, threaded the padlock through 2 D-rings, one on each half of the stock, and snapped the padlock closed.
"Thank you," Dimitri said to the girl, then continued,
After volunteers from the crowd have checked all the apparatus thoroughly, I will be lifted and lowered head first into the chest you see here, which is filled with water. My beautiful assistants will then padlock the top in place." A nervous murmur rippled through the room. "You must be convinced the chest is nothing more than it seems, that I have not tampered with it in any way. Now for the volunteers." With one hand shielding his eyes from the lights, he looked over the crowd. His eyes came to rest on our table. Pointing at us, he said, "You, all of you, would you be so kind?" Catching my eye, he shook his head at me, so I remained behind as the magicians at my table filed onto the stage. Zoom Zoom appeared from backstage and joined them, even though he hadn't been called. Dimitri didn't seem to mind. As he watched, the men examined every pane of glass, every nook, every cranny of the chest. When they had apparently satisfied themselves, Dimitri asked them, "Could you see any alterations in the chest that might explain an easy escape?" Each of them shook his head. "We could not," announced Mr. Mortimer in his stage voice. Apparently he'd been voted the group's spokesman, as the others had remained silent, merely nodding their agreement. "What about you?" Dimitri pointed to one of the magicians who looked most unhappy at being singled out. A hawkish man with angry eyes, he glared at Dimitri. "If this box has a trick, I do not know it." "Why don't you ask Mr. Houdini?" Before the man could answer, Dimitri turned to address the crowd. "Some of you may be too young to remember the acclaimed mentalist, but may I present the great Danilov." The crowd clapped politely as Danilov took a bow and shook Dimitri's hand. After a whispered exchange with the magician, Danilov hurried off stage. "Or you," Dimitri pointed to Dr. Zawicki. "You claim to talk to the dead. Maybe Mr. Houdini will speak to you."
"Doubtful. No one ever said he was murdered," Zoom Zoom hissed as he ducked backstage. The other magicians filed in after Danilov and retook their seats as Dimitri announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, these men are part of an august group of magicians. If they can't see how I perform this escape, then it must be a very good trick indeed." "I have a really bad feeling about this," Mr. Mortimer again whispered in my ear as he settled himself in his seat. "It's long been believed the secrets of the chest died with Mr. Houdini." "Could Mr. Fortunoff have a new trick up his sleeve?" I asked. "There are only so many ways to get out of a chest filled with water that's locked from the outside." I didn't like the hint of impending doom in his voice. I fought with myself. I wanted to stop the whole thing. But what if he really could get out of that contraption? He wasn't suicidal, as far as I knew, and I was in enough trouble already. Against my better judgment, I decided to let the show go on. We watched as the assistants first checked the shackles and tested the block and tackle. Then they helped the magician as he was lifted, then lowered into the tank. Quickly, the women lowered the lid and snapped several padlocks in place around its edge, effectively securing it to the chest, with Dimitri clearly visible inside. I held my breath as the assistants drew a curtain around the chest and left the stage. Apparently, the rest of the audience felt as I did. They didn't move. Not even a whisper broke the silence. An eternity passed, then another. The audience grew restless. Nervous whispering buzzed. Finally, someone shouted, "It's been too long! Somebody get him out of that thing!" Other voices joined in agreement. "Come," Mr. Mortimer ordered as he rose to his feet and grabbed my hand, pulling me with him. His friends fell in step behind us as we started for the stage. We had made it to the first step when Molly ran out from stage left. Her face was stricken, streaked with tears. "Oh my God, he's dead!" Chapter 2. "Keep everybody back!" I shouted to the security guards, who rushed from their post by the entrance as I yanked the curtain aside. I didn't wait to see if they could follow orders. Photographers rushed in, flashbulbs popping. On the stage,
People formed a ring around the Houdini water box, paralyzed, frozen with horror. Dimitri floated in the water. He didn't move. With one quick glance, I located a sledgehammer resting against the side wall just off the stage, probably put there by the magician as a backup plan. "People, stand back," Mr. Mortimer shouted. Adrenaline spiking, I swung the hammer at the glass. A spiderweb of tiny cracks formed, but the glass held. I raised the hammer to swing again when the weight of the water broke the weakened glass. The ragdoll body of Dimitri Fortunoff washed out at my feet. Apparently, he'd made it as far as extricating himself from the handcuffs. Molly immediately dropped to her knees and began CPR. Kneeling beside her, I reached to find a pulse. His skin was cold, clammy. My fingers had yet to find the trace of a beat when paramedics shouldered through the crowd and took charge. Within minutes, they had Dimitri strapped to a gurney, a breathing device over his face. "Where are you taking him?" I asked. "UMC," one said over his shoulder as they rushed Dimitri out and the crowd closed around us. For a moment, no one said anything as we all stared at each other, completely stunned at what had happened. "Does anyone know if Dimitri has any family?" I asked, feeling sick to my stomach. "He had a wife. She died," Molly said, her voice choked with emotion. "Anyone else?" "He didn't speak of anyone." That left me to go to the hospital, sign the papers. I'd do it anyway. I felt responsible. He'd died in my hotel, on my watch, and I'd even been warned it was coming. Guilt settled over me, constricting my heart. While Dimitri's day was worse than mine, it wasn't considerably worse. I'd almost rather trade places with him. Grabbing 2 security guards from out front, I posted them around the water torture box. "Don't let anyone near this thing, not until the police arrive. You got it?" If someone had tampered with it, there would be hell to pay. "I always thought this thing was cursed," remarked Detective Romeo as he paced around the contraption, his hands behind his back, his eyes wide with delight. He looked like a kid at Christmas. "Cursed?" Tired of standing while I waited for the police, I had roosted on the steps to one of the set pieces. Everyone else had either scattered to the dressing rooms or milled in the hallways. I wouldn't let anyone leave until the police arrived. Now that they had, I thankfully transferred the mantle of responsibility to the young detective. With his rumpled suit, poorly knotted tie, and raincoat, Romeo was channeling Columbo. Perhaps he was compensating for looking all of 12 years old, with his messy sandy brown hair and guileless face. Or perhaps he didn't know how to dress. Either way, I was glad to see him. He was my contact with the Metropolitan Police Department, Metro to all of us Las Vegans, and he owed me. "Houdini insisted on absolute loyalty from all those around him," Romeo explained. "There's a quote attributed to Houdini, something about wanting his show to be the best in the world while he was alive, and after he was dead, wanting none other to be like it. So if all his secrets were buried with him, how is this here? Theodore, the brother, defied Harry. He gave the original torture cell to a friend." My heart momentarily leapt at the name. My Theodore was in Helsinki, or Moscow, or Prague, some faraway place I hadn't been to and couldn't picture. Right now, I sure could use one of his hugs. But that, of course, wasn't going to happen, a fact that amazingly made my day even worse. "So you think Harry Houdini cursed this thing from beyond because his brother didn't do as he asked?" "Not really." Romeo looked a bit sheepish. "But it makes a good story." "How do you know all of this?" Romeo reached up as if pulling something from behind my ear, then showed me the quarter in his previously empty hand. "I'm a bit of an amateur magician, using the term loosely." "I never knew that about you," I said, truly surprised. "Why haven't you told me before?" "It never came up. And besides,
I didn't think being a prestidigitator would add gravitas to my whole detective thing.
Perhaps not, but that word is impressive. Accustomed to my sarcasm, Romeo ignored me. So, if this water torture thing was on public display or whatever, I said when I couldn't get a smile out of him, its secrets must be well known.
Actually, no. None of those close to Houdini ever breathed a word, and the original torture cell was destroyed by fire.
Yet, here it is, I said, not understanding any of this.
Perhaps a replica. There was one, but no one knows where it is. And rumor has it another one was made without permission by the woodworker hired to fashion the original. Or it could be something thrown together from old pictures of the exterior.
Romeo reached out to touch the box, then thought better of it.
I wonder if this is the original replica or the fake.
Can you have a fake replica? I mused out loud. And who would care as long as it works?
The person who owns it, Romeo said, choosing to ignore my musings. The real replica would be worth close to $2 million.
$2 million? I guess it's safe to assume a lesser magician toiling in a show long past its prime probably didn't have that kind of money. So if Dimitri doesn't own it, who does? I left Romeo examining the torture cell and looking for clues, or whatever it was detectives do. His men were busy questioning everyone who had been backstage, out front, or who had access to the torture cell, a process that would probably take most of the night. The young detective was humoring me, I could tell. It's not as if I knew a crime had been committed. Was this a trick gone horribly wrong? Or had someone tampered with the water box? How would we know if no one knew its secrets? Lost in thought, I charged through the casino and ran smack into a chest I recognized. "Dane, what are you doing here?" He grabbed my shoulders to steady me.
"Looking for you?"
A long, tall drink of Texas charm. Paxton Dane was a watchdog for the gaming control board. The Babylon was part of his territory. At 6'4", with wavy brown hair that begged for fingers to be run through it, emerald green eyes that seemed to give half of the female population an urge to strip on the spot, and an aw-shucks manner, Dane was a walking, talking, living, breathing, sexual tractor beam. Tonight he looked especially hunkalicious in creased jeans, crocodile kickers, a tweed blazer in browns and greens, and a shirt that matched his eyes and accented broad shoulders that tapered nicely to his narrow waist. And wouldn't you know it, in addition to being the stuff of female fantasies, he was also a nice guy, with the whole Southern chivalry thing going on. Add the fact that he didn't try to hide his attraction to me, and I found resisting him darn near impossible, even with my considerable talents. "Why are you looking for me?" I asked, unwilling to resist him holding onto my elbow as he escorted me to the door and the waiting valet. The heat of his hand radiated through the thin cashmere of my sweater. A jolt of attraction arced through me. My brain said no, but my body didn't speak the same language. Clearly, fighting with myself was a losing battle. Briefly, I wondered if that was even a battle that could be won. If so, between me and myself, who would win and who would lose?
"I heard about your interesting evening,"
Dane said, his mouth close to my ear, spreading the warmth. Like liquid chocolate, his voice was smooth, delicious.
"I thought maybe I could help."
He whistled in appreciation as the valet eased the Ferrari to the curb.
"That car still makes my pulse pound."
And here I thought it was me, I shot back, then cringed. Sometimes my mouth works before my brain engages. Another example of that body-brain disconnect. Flirting with Dane didn't seem like the smartest thing to do, especially given my libido situation.
"That goes without saying."
He gave me a wry smile. "Did you bring a ride?" I asked.
"No, Paolo dropped me off."
Paolo was the Babylon's head chauffeur, and he normally worked the night shift. "Well then, cowboy, put your ass in some class." I handed the valet a 20, then folded myself into the car, making a mental note that next time I drove the thing, I would not wear such a short skirt. "I'll give you a ride, but I doubt you're going to like where I'm headed." The cool night air streamed in through the open top as I followed traffic up the strip. There were shorter routes to UMC, the University Medical Center, but with a handsome man in the car and an unsavory task awaiting me, I was in no hurry. Ignoring Dane's presence, men called out to me from the sidewalks. "Nice car, lady," one guy shouted. "Want to take me for a ride?" another added. "I'd like to rev your engine," a young man shouted. Safe in the car and with a chaperone, I rewarded that one with a wave. Dane looked over at me and raised an eyebrow. "Do you always attract this sort of attention?" If I had known what a man magnet this car was, I would have sold my soul a decade ago to get my hands on one. "I wouldn't think you'd need the car," Dane said as he put a hand over mine. I didn't have to look at him to see the warmth in his eyes. I'd seen it before, and I could feel it in his touch. "Dane." "I know." He removed his hand. Where his fingers had lingered on mine, my skin now felt cold. "Where are we going that I won't like?" he asked, kindly letting me off the hook. UMC. I shivered as I said the letters. Nothing good ever brought me to a hospital, at least not since I was born in one, but I don't remember that. The last time I'd been there, the big boss had died, once, been shocked back to life, then had emergency heart surgery. I need to check on the magician and see if they can give me a preliminary cause of death. "Wasn't it an accident?" I gave Dane the whole story, as it existed so far. The rumors that Dimitri Fortunoff was the masked Houdini, the death threats, the Chinese water torture cell. "If you don't know how he was supposed to get out in the first place, how will you know if someone rigged the water thing so Mr. Fortunoff couldn't escape?" I've asked myself the same question, and I still have no idea. But if we can start ruling things out, like drugs or a heart attack, maybe we can close in on what really happened. "That's gonna be like trying to scratch your ear with your elbow." I had a sinking feeling he was right. The emergency room at UMC was a hive of activity when Dane and I pushed through the doors, adding our bodies to the bustle. After waiting in front of the check-in desk for several minutes, I finally managed to get the attention of one of the nurses. With hollow eyes and the pallor of the walking dead, she pushed a strand of hair out of her face and hooked it behind an ear as she gave me the once-over. "What can I do for you?" she asked. Even her voice sounded exhausted. "A magician from the Athena was brought in a little while ago," I said. "Tall guy, dressed in vintage swim trunks. He drowned. I'd like to talk to the doctor who signed his death certificate." The nurse again brushed at the strand of hair that refused to remain moored behind her ear and out of her face. She consulted a clipboard. "Hun, we've had 2 ODs, a gunshot wound, 3 stab wounds, several heart attacks, and 1 guy with a light bulb broken off in his... Well, never mind." She glanced up at us and gave a weak smile. "But no drowned magicians." "Really? You sure?" I leaned across the counter and looked at her list. The paramedics said they were bringing him here. The nurse snatched away her list. "No drowned magician." If they didn't bring him here, where did they take him? The night was still relatively young when, with Dane dogging my heels, I pushed through the doors into the lobby of the Babylon Resort and Casino, my home away from home, which, come to think of it, due to the hours I worked, felt more like home than home did. Not good. The big boss's pride and joy, the Babylon was an architectural work of art, with its soaring ceilings covered with blown glass hummingbirds and butterflies in flight, polished marble floors, and intricate inlaid mosaics. Bright swags of multicolored cloth tented above the reception area, reminiscent of an Arabian market. Adjacent to reception was the entrance to the bazaar, an avenue of high-end shops where the top luxury brands beckoned conspicuous consumers with a dazzling show of bling and wildly expensive designer threads, shoes, and accessories. People came from far and wide to gaze in awe, even if they couldn't spring for any of the treasures. A river of water, our very own version of the Euphrates, meandered through the lobby and into the casino beyond. Lined with flowering plants and filled with goldfish and carp, the stream hosted several pairs of swans and numerous families of ducks. One of the big boss's touches that necessitated a vet on retainer for bird birth control. Swans are foul-tempered beasts, and too many ducks can get messy, and they breed like rabbits. We learned that the hard way. Railed footbridges arcing over the Euphrates provided easy access to the other side, as well as picturesque spots for photos. Directly across from the reception area, separated behind a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass, loomed an indoor ski hill of man-made snow. The runs were closing for the night. A few people still stood at the window, watching the skiers making their last dash down the hill. While a ski slope wasn't particularly consistent with our ancient Persia theme, it got people in the doors, which was the whole point. The big boss was a genius when it came to pulling people inside. The critical Vegas success skill. Dane and I dodged a cluster of folks, their faces turned skyward as they admired the ceiling and its splash of colorful creatures in flight. We headed for the stairs that would take us to the mezzanine and my office. Once out of the lobby, with our footfalls echoing off the metal stairs and reverberating in the stairwell, Dane asked,
"What next?"
Pressing the bar on the exit door and pushing it open, I threw over my shoulder, "I hit the phones. I'm going to find where they took that magician if we have to call every hospital in town." For-profit hospitals had been sprouting like weeds in the suburbs, so I had my work cut out for me.
"Let's split the city. You take the west half, I'll take the east,"
Dane offered. "Deal." The light in my outer office still glowed, so I didn't bother rooting in my bag for my keys. Miss Patterson, my stalwart first assistant, manned her desk like a captain at the helm of her ship. A fabulous almost 50, with spiky golden hair, warm eyes, and the best bullshit meter of anyone I'd ever met, Miss P was the compass that kept my office on course. I'd be totally at sea without her. Tonight she wore a trim, gunmetal gray suit with a hint of lace at her décolletage, a stunning David Yurman necklace of turquoise and gold, matching earrings, and a hint of wicked in her eyes, placed there, no doubt, by her much younger lover, the beautiful Jeremy Whitlock. She greeted me with a fleeting smile and a raised eyebrow when she saw Dane behind me. If she had an opinion about his presence, I couldn't tell. Her manner was efficient, her tone clipped when she said, "Good timing. Your mother is holding on line 1. And this night had been going so well." My mother, Mona, gave a whole new meaning to the term high-risk pregnancy. Her meteoric mood swings put anyone who crossed her path in mortal danger. At an age where she should have been looking forward to grandchildren, she found herself inexplicably with child. She had been 16 when she had me, an inconvenience that could have been due to hormonal overload and its resulting stupidity. But now, being of a certain age and having had some prior experience, Mona should have known better. To compound matters, she hadn't worked up the courage to tell the big boss he was going to be a parent, again. I was the sole keeper of her secret. Lucky me. "Mother," I said, keeping my voice passive until I could gauge her mood. "Lucky, darling, could you stop by when you have a moment? I need your help." Sweetness and light. So unexpected. I smelled a rat. "What with? I'm working a pretty big problem of my own." "Oh, it won't take long," she said breezily. I heard my father's voice in the background, a scuffling noise, then his irritated growl boomed over the line.
"Could you get up here? Your mother is plotting the annihilation of the Pussy Palace, and I need your help." Still clutching the receiver after the line went dead, I must have looked stricken as Miss P and Dane stared at me owl-eyed from the doorway. "Is everything okay?" Miss P asked,
clearly alarmed. Do either of you know what the Pussy Palace is? I slowly recradled the phone.
I do,
Dane announced, looking a little sheepish.
It's a new whorehouse in Pahrump. I believe it opened in that abandoned hotel just down the street from your mother's place.
I don't think I'm going to ask how you know that, I said, narrowing my eyes at him.
I don't think I would answer if you did.
He gave me a look of pure innocence. My mother owned Mona's place, the self-styled best whorehouse in Pahrump, and she would consider competition moving in an act of war. Giving weight to her delicate condition, I made a mental note to lock up all the firearms. At least that explains why Mother is on the warpath and the big boss is at the end of his rope. I've been summoned to referee. Could the two of you start on the call list? I saw the question in Miss P's eyes. Raising my hand, I stopped her. Dane can explain it to you. I shouldn't be too long unless the big boss strangles the woman before I get there. And frankly, if he does, he'd be doing us all a huge favor. Mother had moved into the big boss's apartment on the top floor, the 52nd, of the west wing of the hotel. For some odd reason, I liked the fact that my parents were living in sin, thumbing their noses at the world. There was a cosmic symmetry to it. They'd met at a party when Mona was a teenager, turning tricks and lying about her age. The big boss, 20 years her senior, was a golden boy in the casino business. They'd fallen madly in love. The resulting pregnancy, me, had been an inconvenience and an embarrassment to my father's employers. Too late, he discovered Mother's true age. Threatened with a felony prosecution, the choice was simple. He denied everything, and she refused to name the father, my father. Unbeknownst to anyone, they had spoken every night since. Neither ever married. When the big boss faced death, he called for Mother, and she'd been front and center in his life, and apparently his bed, ever since. Talk about history repeating itself. At least, if I hurried, this time around there wouldn't be any felonies involved. The sound of happy people playing hit me before I reached the casino. The come-on songs of the slots competed with the buzz of voices and the piped-in background music, creating a symphony that was music to my ears. A full casino was essential to my job security. Tonight, the large room was packed. All shapes and sizes ringed the table games, 3 deep around some. The slots were fully occupied. Patrons waiting for a machine circled lazily like sharks timing the kill. Delilah's bar, the main watering hole, sat on a raised platform in the middle of the casino. Colored cloth tented above it, carrying the theme from the lobby into the large room where it was repeated over and over to give the feeling of a comforting Persian marketplace. Torches flamed under glass, cascades of flowering plants draped from pillars and latticework, defining the cozy space of the bar. Water features burbled in the corners. A wall of water cascading behind the bar was the centerpiece. I heard someone playing the piano, but I didn't stop to listen. Teddie used to play the piano in Delilah's while he waited for me to end my day. Too many memories. As I strode through the casino, dodging patrons, I tried to read the crowd. It was a game I played. Where were they from? What did they do? What were they looking for in Vegas? Were they finding it? The aliens still in costume were easy, so I eliminated them. The 2 guys in plaid shirts and creased jeans leaning against a pillar, sipping drinks and eyeing the ladies, looked like 2 lawyers from Dallas. Their look was too studied, a purchased casualness. Lawyers for sure. The 3 guys in suits with open collars and loafers with no socks shouted European. I didn't know any red-blooded American male who would be caught dead wearing nice shoes with no socks. And everyone on this continent knew suits in Vegas screamed over the hill. My eyes came to rest on a lady nursing a yard of daiquiris. I'd pegged her age to be somewhere mid-50s. She wore tight, pink spandex pants and a t-shirt stretched to its limit across her very ample chest. Emblazoned across her front was the slogan, If these were brains, I'd be a genius. I smiled. I couldn't help myself. Glancing down at my own inadequate chest, I figured if hers were genius material, mine were double-digit IQ at best. Ah, me. Just one of my many inadequacies. If I weren't rushing to the scene of a future crime, I'd stop and talk to her. Anyone who would wear that shirt in public was worth knowing. On the far side of the casino, I pressed the button, summoning an elevator, and stared at my reflection in the polished brass doors. Tall, and after enduring the last 6 weeks of enforced loneliness, I'd finally made it to trim. My skirt was loose, and the front kept chasing away around to the back. I'd never had that problem before. I assumed some fashion trick I didn't know would solve the issue, but for now, a safety pin was in order. My hair, recently returned to its natural light brown, brushed my shoulders in soft waves. A thin fringe tickled my eyes, drawing attention to their size and their blueness. With a deft touch and some blush, my recalcitrant cheekbones could sometimes be encouraged to show themselves. Tonight wasn't one of those times. And if eyes really are a reflection of your soul, then mine was an old, tired soul. As the bell dinged and the elevator doors eased open, I gave my appearance a C, chalking up my deficiencies to too many hours at work, too many days without rest, and no sex. All were related, but I was too tired to make the connections. I wondered how long the flight was to Helsinki, or whatever faraway place Teddie played next, and how much a first-class ticket and some sleep would cost. Whatever the price, I was close to the point that I'd pay it no matter what, if only Teddie asked me to come. But he hadn't. He'd been distancing himself more and more. I couldn't remember our last conversation. Had it been 4 days? 5? Even though I didn't want to acknowledge it, Teddie had not only put distance between us, he was truly gone. He just hadn't told me so. Our time together a distant, exquisite fantasy, a memory, nothing more. The thought cracked my heart. Something needed to be done. I just didn't seem to have the proper knife to sever the ties that bind. I so enjoyed being one of a pair. So now, I dangled, like the condemned at the end of a rope, unable and unwilling to free myself. Stepping into the elevator, I stuck my magic card into the slot and pressed PH, then leaned against the side and shut my eyes. 52 floors, 40 winks. That ought to at least help. It didn't.
There you are.
My father stopped his pacing as I stepped from the elevator. He'd been lurking by the doors, apparently waiting for me.
It's about time. I can't do anything with the woman. She's lost her mind.
A short man, his dark hair now turning a distinguished salt and pepper, his features still chiseled, his body the envy of men 20 years his junior. He came to a stop in front of me. Dressed in a white polo shirt and casual slacks, he looked sexy. I shivered. Now that was a creepy thought to have about my father. Of course, the father thing was still pretty new, but still, I needed to get a grip. I must have been staring because my father said, "What?" "I don't think I've seen you out of your suit before, except in the gym, but that's different." For a moment, he stared at me, his eyes blinking furiously. There was anger there and a hint of amusement. All was not lost.
There must be some weird affliction affecting the women in my life. Neither you nor your mother is making any sense whatsoever,
he finally announced. That's our job. Keep you men off kilter so you don't think you're running the world.
Running the world?
He rolled his eyes, another first.
I can't even run my life. I've been chasing my tail ever since your mother moved in.
He made a sweeping gesture with one hand as he grabbed my elbow with the other, urging me inside.
You have to talk some sense into her.
She is sort of an unguided missile in the battle of life, isn't she? I would have added he's obviously been chasing Mother's tail as well, but I stifled myself. He looked on the brink of homicide as it was.
She'd charge hell with a bucket of ice water.
He shot me a half-smile that looked a bit forced.
I love that about her.
Me too. I'll see what I can do." Our steps echoed off the burnished mahogany floors as he escorted me through the vast main room of his apartment, past lesser works of the great masters, small pieces from his impressive collection on display downstairs, hanging on the leather-upholstered walls and appropriately lit with brass fixtures, and past tasteful arrangements of furniture constructed of woods from various continents and hides from various beasts, all sitting on perfectly knotted, exquisitely hued silk carpets. He didn't even let me linger at his wall of floor-to-ceiling windows to drink in the incredible view of the Strip. He stopped at the entrance to the hallway leading to the private areas.
"She's in the master bedroom."
"And that would be—"
"Through the double doors at the end of the hall. You can't miss it. Good luck."
He turned on his heel and headed for the bar. As I stared down the long corridor in front of me, I felt like Indiana Jones entering a cave to face life-threatening challenges. Except, for me, there was no treasure at the end of the test. The soft carpet cushioned my steps as I advanced on the double doors. "Mother?" "In here, dear," she cheerily replied. This was not good. Mona always used honey to lure the bear to the trap. Mother sat in the middle of a huge four-poster, her long legs crossed, her brow furrowed. She'd pulled her dark hair into a hasty knot at the nape of her neck. A few tendrils had escaped and curled softly around her face, hiding any hint of her penchant for plastic surgery. Her skin flawless, her blue eyes luminous, she looked younger than me. Not something I took pride in, but I refused to engage in a war of the scalpel with her. She chewed on the end of a pencil as she stared at a notepad, which she held at arm's length, too vain to admit she needed reading glasses. Without glancing up, she motioned me over. I paused awkwardly at the edge of the bed, taking a moment to drink in my surroundings. A very masculine room. Blues and browns dominated the color scheme, with hints of golds in the damask headboard and bedspread. Another wall of windows captured the Strip at a jaw-dropping angle. A few animal heads hung on the far wall over the fireplace, glaring accusatorily. I never understood the whole dead zoo thing, and I didn't think I would want to sleep in one. Mother, on the other hand, looked right at home. "Sit." My mother patted a spot on the bed next to her. Instead, I grabbed the desk chair and pulled it around so I could face her. Sitting on the bed my mother shared with the big boss didn't seem right. In fact, the thought made me queasy. I'm very visual, and having right in front of me the prop where, in all likelihood, my future sibling was conceived didn't help at all. Never one to wade into the shallow end, I decided to leap headfirst into the fray. "Want to tell me about the Pussy Palace?" Mother's smile snapped down into a frown as she glared at me. "They moved in right down the street. Can you believe it? Trying to steal my thunder. Imagine." I didn't think that's what they were trying to steal, but, valuing my life, I didn't say so. "What are you going to do?" "Compete," she announced proudly. "First, I'm developing a list of specials I thought we might offer." Specials? That queasy feeling hit me again. She consulted her notes. "We could do golf packages with the championship course that opened recently in Pahrump. I know they're trying to attract new business." "Your slogan could be, 'Come, play around, then play around with us,'" I suggested. "There's got to be something about a short stick. Or maybe something about not feeling up to par. Or maybe we can polish your balls." Mona narrowed her eyes at me. "What about a flat rate program on our slow days? All the sex and liquor you can stand between the hours of 4 and 7 in the afternoon, for one low price." "You've been doing some thinking," I said, biting back my smile. "Oh, I'm just getting started. We could have a loyalty club. 12 punches and the 13th is free," I suggested, warming to the game. "I knew you weren't taking this seriously," she huffed. "Sweetheart, this could really work. Orgy parties like the sex clubs here in town, daily specials, which we already do, discount coupons." "What about a movie night? You could show some of the porn I get for the girls at Smokin' Joe's. I was teasing, but she took me seriously, scribbling the idea on her pad. And a senior night? She asked. No, you'd have to charge them more, I remarked, trying to keep a straight face. The old men take too long. Now you're being snarky. She put down her pad and gave me that all-knowing mother look. Not getting any, are you? I have hit a dry spell with Teddie being gone and all. Being a good girl and keeping the home fires burning. You make me sound like Tom Bodett in those silly Motel 6 commercials. We'll keep the light on for ya. Whatever happened to those anyway? They went the way of the dodo. Cute. Are you trying to tell me I'm being stupid? Teddie's chasing his dream. You need to find yours. My dream was a man at home. Teddie's dreams took him on the road. I didn't see an easy solution, so I did what I always do with an impossible personal problem. I shelved it and changed the subject. Mother, you can't keep doing this. Doing what? Pretending life is going to go on as it always has? I reached over and took her hand. You cannot have it all. Why not? Why do we have to play by other people's rules? Why do we always have to give up something, a part of ourselves, to get something, someone we want? Maybe it's the price the universe charges for dreams. The big boss is a very important businessman. He has a certain reputation to uphold. With prostitution illegal in Clark County, you two in bed together puts him in a very awkward position, not only with his corporate investors, but with the gaming commission as well. What should I do? Give Mona's place to Trudy. Tell the big boss he is going to be a father, and live your life at his side. My mother seemed to shrink within herself. I've been thinking about it. I know you're right. But give up Mona's place? I can't bring myself to do it, she whispered. Why not? Trudy would do a great job. She's been with you forever. I'm afraid I would lose myself. Mother, that business doesn't define you. The big boss doesn't define you. You would never tolerate that. You're not one to hide in anyone's shadow. I know. If I want a new life, I have to let the old one go. She gave me a piercing look that was pretty easy to interpret. The relationship doctor should focus on healing herself. Head in the sand, my heart as delicate as paper-thin Victorian china, I chose to ignore her. Mona straightened her back a little, her confidence growing. This is such a different world here. I don't know the rules. You and Albert handle it all so seamlessly, with such ease. You'll get used to it. Actually, it's not that different than running a bordello in Pahrump. We're still in the service business. We just deal with more money and larger egos here in Sin City. I could see her starting to believe me. Life with the big boss is your dream come true. Don't lose courage now. Seize it before it's too late. But Mona's place is my legacy. It's the only thing I have to leave to you. It's okay. I patted her hand. You've given me a lifetime of wonderful memories, and that's even better. Personally, I would be appalled to wake up one morning to find myself the owner of a whorehouse in Pahrump, but it would hurt her to tell her so. She swiped at a tear. Now you're just being nice. It happens occasionally. I pulled her toward the edge of the bed. Come, we need to rescue Father from a bottle of wild turkey. The big boss sat on one of the large leather couches facing the brilliant lights of the Strip. As he stared out the window, his fingers worked a small scrap of paper, which I knew to be a $100 bill, folding it, creasing the fold, then making another. Without thinking, he would turn the bill into a small origami animal. Lately, he'd been on an elephant kick. He made them with their trunks raised, an ancient sign of good luck, he'd said. I wondered if he'd been unwittingly creating fertility talismans as well. Mother curled in next to him. Looping an arm around her shoulders, he pulled her tight as he stuffed the tiny paper creature into his pocket. Turning my back to my parents, I stood looking out at my city. Lucky has helped me make a few decisions, my mother announced, breaking the comfortable silence. I'm giving my business to Trudy. Glancing at my father, I saw him visibly relax. His eyes telegraphed his thanks.
I know that will be hard for you,
he said to my mother. Yes, I fought long and hard for that business. It's a part of me. I will have to find another way to help the girls. She glanced at my father, who gave her a nod. So yes, it will be hard, but perhaps not quite as hard as what I have to tell you. My cue to leave, I said. It hadn't been a rat I smelled. It had been a setup. My mother grabbed my hand and held tight. Don't leave. I need your support. I tried in vain to extricate my hand. Mother, this isn't my place.
What is this about?
My father looked alarmed. It's a family matter, and we're family. Please stay. I need you here, my mother implored. Gripping my hand like a lifeline, she shrugged herself off the big boss's shoulder and turned to look at him. With her free hand, she clutched his. Albert, I have something to tell you. Chapter 3. I braced for impact. Albert, sweetheart. Mona trailed off, clearly losing her nerve. She let go of my hand and I moved back to the window, out of the danger zone. Lucky, would you tell him? I can't seem to find the words. The skin drawn tight across her face, she looked stricken, or she needed to change surgeons. No, I won't tell him. You know what happens to the messenger.
Well, one of you damn well better tell me before I shoot you both,
my father said, his voice tinged with anger, rode on an undercurrent of frustration. Mona took a deep breath, let it out, drew herself up, then sagged once again. She threw a pleading look at me, but I didn't cave. Okay, Albert, she started once again, this time looking more determined. She looked him in the eye. I'm carrying our child. I heard the fates laughing and the silence that followed. My father stared at Mona, his face blank, the muscles slack.
What?
He finally managed to choke. I'm pregnant. Another long silence as my father stared at my mother. I thought I felt the planets shift in their orbits, or maybe I was imagining it.
Are you okay?
My father asked my mother. The color leaked from his face. His eyes mirrored his confusion as he struggled with Mona's blind side. Having been the first lucky recipient of this little tidbit, I knew how he felt.
And the baby?
He asked. We're both fine, darling. Her eyes saucers of fear, Mona brushed her fingers across his cheek. And past the danger point. The big boss extricated his hand from hers and came to stand by me, leaving her marooned with her fear. Passing a hand wearily over his eyes, he looked out at the lights. I doubt he saw them. I hooked my arm through his, but said nothing, leaving him with his thoughts. Mother's bombshell had hit him hard. I could feel him shaking. The minutes ticked by as we stood like that, father and daughter, together facing the world. I could hear my mother fidgeting nervously behind us, but for once she kept her mouth shut. Finally, the big boss broke the silence.
You and your mother were the best things to ever happen to me. No matter what happened, I always knew I had you. I love you, you know.
I'd waited a lifetime to hear my father say that to me. And now that he had, it didn't change anything. The earth didn't move, my world wasn't rocked, bright lights didn't flash, and bells and whistles didn't go off. In that moment, I realized I'd been standing on the bedrock of the big boss's love for years. The words merely repeated what I already knew. I know. He nervously swiped at a tear. I did the same. Then he patted my hand and, pulling his arm from mine, he returned to his spot on the couch next to Mother. She looked terrified. Gently, he stroked her face. How? He asked. The usual way. You were there. Mona's cheeks reddened. Well, if this wasn't a night of firsts all the way around. A grin split his face.
That much I know, but I thought you were too
old, Mona huffed, but she still looked like a deer caught in headlights. Thank you for pointing that out.
You must admit, this child is pushing the envelope,
my father teased. The final treason of my shriveled-up ovaries, Mona deflated. I know you're angry.
Angry? Why would you ever think that? I admit, I am a bit stunned, but angry? No.
Mother and I stared at him, mouths agape. Really? I said. So this is okay with you? I'd be lying if I said I wasn't relieved. Mother deserved her shot at true love. So did the big boss, for that matter.
A child is a gift, my father explained to me. With your mother and me, the gifts seem to come at the oddest times, but that doesn't make them any less special. It took me a lifetime of suffering, watching you grow up from afar, not sharing the joy or the responsibility. When you were 15 and couldn't live in Mona's place anymore, and your mother sent you to me, that was the happiest day of my life.
My mother gripped his hand until her knuckles turned white. Tears leaked down her face.
I made a choice years ago, my father said, his face sobering. I took the easy way out. I didn't do right by either of you. I cheated all of us, and I've carried that burden ever since.
Mother and I both started to argue, but he held up his hand, silencing us.
Now, amazingly, life has offered us a second chance, and me, a chance at redemption. I don't know what I did to deserve it, but I couldn't be happier.
He turned his attention to me as he pulled my mother back to his shoulder.
I want you to know how sorry I am, Lucky. I wish I could make it up to you, all the lost years. But your childhood is a thing of the past.
Oh, I wouldn't be too sure, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Drama makes me nervous, and this evening had served up more than I could handle. Take care of Mother. That will be more than enough for me. I left them like that, cocooned together on the couch, savoring their togetherness. I'd never felt so alone. Everyone else's happiness painted my loneliness in stark relief. While thrilled for them, my heart ached for that kind of joy for me. Not the pregnant kind, but the together kind. My parents had carried their torches for a lifetime. I don't know how they'd stood it. 6 weeks and I was ready to chuck everything and race to Teddie's side. Totally pathetic. And futile. It wouldn't work. The price was too high. Vegas was my town. A square peg, I fit here. This hotel was my home. My co-workers, my chosen family. If I turned my back on my life here, I'd be like the girl in Lost Horizon who attempted to leave Shangri-La. I'd shrivel and die before I made it past the city limits. Sometimes life sucks. The light still burned in my office as I pushed through the door. Any luck? I asked Miss P, who looked like she was making preparations to call it a night. Your cowboy is calling the last of them. Clearly she wanted more info on how Dane happened to be corralled into the evening's excitement, but she didn't ask. He's in your office, and I'm going home to a warm bed. And a hot guy, I said, wanting to see her blush. She didn't disappoint. Waving, she disappeared through the door. Dane, his feet on the desk, nodded at me, the phone pressed to his ear as he listened to someone on the other end of the line. Plopping myself on my couch and kicking off my shoes, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and tried not to think about the last time I'd been on that couch. Teddie had been angry. I'd been hurt. Who knew office makeup sex could be so delicious?
Thank you,
Dane said, then slammed the receiver back in the cradle.
What are you grinning at?
He asked. A memory.
It must have been good.
The best. I raised my head and opened my eyes. He had a weird look on his incredible face. For a moment, I thought he could read my mind. Now that would be really awkward. Any luck? I asked.
Are you sure the paramedics came and got your magician friend?
Absolutely. 2 guys, bodybuilder types, little red shields on their sleeves, their shirts a couple of sizes too small.
You would notice that,
Dane said with a smile. I'm human. Sue me, I countered. They even had the gurney and the breathing thing. Why do you ask?
I struck out with the hospitals, so I called the ambulance companies. No one answered a call at the Athena.
What are you saying?
I don't know who picked him up or where they took him. Quite simply, your Mr. Fortunoff has disappeared.
After he gave me all the details, whom he called and what they told him, Dane went off in search of liquid fortification. I don't know why I agreed to stay and have a drink with him. Weakness, perhaps, or not wanting to be alone. But whatever it was, I felt like I'd started down a path toward perdition. Either that, or I was a glutton for punishment. Hanging around Dane right now was like working in a candy store after having sworn off chocolate. As I moved from the couch to the neutral ground of my desk chair, I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and checked it. Yep, still on, but eerily quiet. Usually the thing was as irritating as an itch I couldn't scratch. No missed calls either. I tried to calculate what time it was on the other side of the world, but I couldn't get my mind around the math. Was Teddie awake? Asleep? Eating a meal? I hadn't a clue. The only thing I was sure of was that he hadn't called in several days. I flipped open the thing and dialed Romeo, trying not to be troubled by the fact I had a police detective's number on speed dial.
What did you find out about the magician?
He asked without preliminaries. He's been abducted by aliens.
Is that fact or speculation?
Oh, I liked this kid. I liked him a lot. How do you prove a theory?
How would I know?
Romeo said, his way of conceding defeat.
I flunked geometry.
That makes 2 of us.
Then back to my original question. Where's the magician and what killed him?
I have no idea, and I don't know. I proceeded to give the detective the details.
Let me get this straight, he said when I'd finished. We have Houdini's water torture cell. Nobody knows where it came from, who owns it, or how it works. Practically the entire universe had access to the thing before the show, and Dimitri Fortunoff appeared dead when 2 guys claiming to be paramedics came and whisked him away, leaving us with no body.
Did anyone see anything unusual? I asked, ever hopeful.
Exactly how would you define unusual in a case like this?
Good point. I heard the outer door open, Dane back with a much-needed elixir.
Your magician has disappeared, Romeo said, restating the obvious.
I refused to be amused by the irony.
I'll try to get a line on the owner of the Houdini thing.
I'll keep you posted, I said, then closed my phone, ending the call. Dane set a tall glass filled with pink liquid and capped by a tiny umbrella on the desk in front of me as I closed my phone and redeposited it in my pocket.
What is that? I asked, eyeing the cutesy drink. I know you don't do umbrellas.
Dane grinned as he lowered himself into one of the chairs on the far side of my desk.
Don't worry, I have a backup.
He set a tumbler filled with 2 fingers of amber liquid in front of him, next to his Bud Longneck. Unadulterated liquor is more my style. I held up the glass and gave it a jaundiced eye.
What is this? It's called Bacardi Party. There's a professional mixologist at the bar, Ron something. Sean insisted you try it. It wouldn't take no for an answer.
Sean, our head bartender, was always trying something new. I gave the brew a sip. Not bad.
He said to warn you, it packs a punch.
Now you're speaking my language. After the Bacardi party, I stashed the tumbler of Wild Turkey 101 Dane had brought as a backup and my medicinal beverage of choice in the fridge as emergency rations. This night had packed a wallop already. Still reeling, I didn't need to add too much alcohol to my already overloaded system. Dane had polished off 2 beers while regaling me with stories of his West Texas childhood, with 2 brothers, and a mother perpetually at sea as to how to handle all that testosterone. He'd joined the military to get the heck out of the Dust Bowl of Lubbock, learned to fly, then landed in Atlantic City when his military commitment ended. The gaming control board there had loaned him to its Nevada counterpart, and he'd stayed. As I listened, I wished I didn't find so much comfort in Dane's nearness. He was a wonderful storyteller. Each of us found humor in the same quirks of life. Warm and gentle, yet strong, I felt drawn to him, and I didn't like myself for it. Loneliness has a way of creeping under one's skin and festering like an infection. Teddie was so far away, the distance diluting the immediacy of our relationship. No longer could we share the details of our days, or ride the waves of our attraction, or simply find comfort and connection in each other's touch. I needed that. We needed that. If there was a we anymore. "Thanks," I said when Dane finished. From the look in his eye, I saw he knew what I was thanking him for. Unable to avoid the siren call of sleep, I added, "I better head for the barn."
"Let me walk with you,"
Dane offered.
"It's late."
Rubbing my swollen feet, I eyed my stilettos. There was no way my screaming dogs were going back in those things, so I opted for a pair of Ferragamo flats I kept in the closet. Stuffing my heels in my Hermes Birkin bag, an insanely expensive gift from the big boss, I shouldered it and began flipping off lights. "Thanks for the offer, but I don't think that would be a good idea," I said, as I motioned Dane through the door, took one last glance around, then pulled it shut behind me.
"Why not? I promise I'll keep my hands off."
"It's not that." His shoulder touched mine as he walked toward the elevator. I liked it, which made the developing ease between us all the more uncomfortable. "We have an insurmountable problem, you and I. Apart from the obvious, we work opposite sides of the fence. A gaming control inspector and an executive with a major hotel cannot be seen to be too chummy. I'd almost said, in bed together. For once my mouth listened to my brain. A friendship between us would create a huge conflict of interest.
"I've taken care of that. I put in my notice."
"What?" I whirled on him. He calmly reached for the handle on the stairwell door, then held it open for me. "You quit your job? Don't tell me I had anything to do with that." I matched his stride down the stairs. He repeated the door thing at the bottom, then we headed across the lobby.
"No, you didn't. Well, not really. I quit my job to take a better one. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't consider the added bonus of eliminating the conflict between us."
I didn't know whether to be flattered or appalled. "Where will you be working?" We pushed out into the night air. The evening's coolness had given way to cold. Distracted when I'd closed up the office, I had left my wrap on the couch. Dane shrugged out of his blazer and settled it over my shoulders. I started to argue, but found myself fresh out of backbone.
"Jeremy has asked me to join his agency."
"Private detective? That's an interesting choice. Dane and the beautiful Jeremy Whitlock. Two more gorgeous men would be hard to find. Women would pay just to have an hour of their undivided attention." I crossed my arms, hugging myself as Dane fell into step beside me, heading down the driveway toward the strip. I thought about asking him what part of no he hadn't understood, but didn't. The truth of it was, I liked having him around, and I didn't want to be alone. But letting him get close was like playing with fire.
"I've been handling investigations for the control board, so it shouldn't be too big a leap. And I like the idea of working for myself. I have a bit of an authority issue."
I noticed. A comfortable silence settled between us as we made the turn around the hotel, leaving the strip behind. Like a handful of diamonds tossed on velvet, the stars twinkled overhead, just out of reach. To our south, the landing lights of planes on approach to McCarran hung in the sky like a string of lanterns lighting a path to the party. As we moved farther from the bright lights, the inky black of night enveloped us. I felt the world fall away. For some odd reason, a childhood memory hit me. I remembered covering myself with a blanket creating a void to block out the real world. In that darkness, I imagined my own fantasy world, one with handsome princes, a real father, and a mother whose spirit wasn't bent beneath a burden of sadness I saw but didn't understand. And it struck me. That's exactly what I was doing right now. I was pretending I could have it all. A father without accepting the burden of being his daughter. True love without surrendering completely. The life I wanted without making the hard choices. Joy without pain. Happiness while avoiding anger. Anger. That was it. Anger. Hit with an unfamiliar urge for introspection, I dug deeper. No, I wasn't angry. I was pissed. Years of bottled-up frustration, of burying emotion, of going along, of not saying how I really felt, and of never being asked, bubbled up through the cracks in my self-delusion. I was mad at Teddie for leaving, for turning his back on us so easily. I was mad at my father for waiting a lifetime to tell me. I was mad at Dane for being so damned good-looking and for not taking no for an answer. I was mad at my mother for teaching me my problems came second to everyone else's. But most of all, I was mad at myself for believing her, for lacking the courage to fight for me, to fight for what I wanted, without feeling guilty or selfish. This was my life, damn it, and I'd better start fighting for it. Dane? Where do you find courage? The need for human contact overriding good sense and propriety, I looped my arm through his.
I've found courage shows up when you need it.
If he thought the question odd, I couldn't tell. He didn't ask me why I asked. He was making it impossible not to like him. Flashing lights atop a horde of police cruisers greeted us as we turned up the drive to the Presidio, my home away from work. A tall column of glass and steel, the Presidio was considered to be the toniest near-strip address in Vegas. On Teddie's suggestion, I had bought the next to the top floor at pre-construction, pre-hype prices. I would have sprung for the top floor, but Teddie had already laid claim to it. Out of habit and a penchant for self-flagellation, I glanced toward the penthouse. It was dark. I couldn't see Teddie's balcony nor my own, both of which were on the west side of the building facing the strip. I didn't see any fire trucks amid the cruisers, no flames licking the side of the building, no plume of smoke rising from the roof, so I didn't panic. A throng had gathered at the entrance. Clustered in small knots, people nervously whispered as Dane and I walked up. I spied a familiar face. Tugging Dane's hand, I said, "Over here. I see somebody who can tell us what's going on." A former NFL lineman, Forrest was the bulk of our security force, both figuratively and literally. Tall, black, and menacing when he wanted to be, he gave the residents, including me, a comfort we otherwise wouldn't have. His face brightened when he saw me, but his eyes still looked troubled.
"Miss Lucky, you can't go inside yet."
"What's happened?" I asked, quite conscious of Dane's quiet, comforting presence at my side.
"Someone broke into Mr. and Mrs. Daniels' apartment on the 25th floor.
"That should be simple enough. The cameras in the elevator and on the floors should tell you who it was," I said. But Forrest shook his head.
"No, the burglar came in through the window."
Dane and I both looked skyward. With no balconies below the top 2 floors, using the window as an entrance seemed impossible.
"The window? Are you sure?"
Dane asked. Forrest nodded.
"I heard the cops talking. Apparently the guy had a glass cutter. He made himself a nice, neat hole. Took jewelry and money, left all the rest," Dane continued. "They haven't said what the guy took, but he was slick all right. He knew right where the safe was and didn't seem to have any trouble busting into it."
Forrest looked at me and I saw the question in his eyes. "This is Mr. Dane," I said, taking Forrest's cue. "He has a background in security work. Dane, this is Forrest, our safety net." The 2 men shook hands.
"I didn't do you all no good tonight," Forrest said, hanging his head. Some things are impossible to stop,
Dane said, his words a salve for Forrest's wounded pride.
You be careful, Miss Lucky.
Forrest's face was a mask of concern.
If he got into the Daniels' place, getting into yours would be a piece of cake. What with the balcony and being so close to the top of the building and all.
On that happy note, Dane and I took our leave. The police were letting the residents back into the building, so we joined the queue, leaving Forrest to find out what he could.
He's right, you know. You could be next,
Dane whispered as he grabbed my elbow. I wondered if the whole elbow bit was a chivalry thing or a good excuse to try to knock me off kilter. Knowing Dane, it was probably both. He'd be sorely disappointed in the slim pickings at my place. I tried to sound brave, but even though the thief hadn't been in my home, I felt a vicarious violation. And in keeping with my recent theme of admitting my shortcomings, I felt a bit afraid. At the elevators, I put my hand on Dane's chest. This is the end of the trail, cowboy.
What if the burglar is hiding in your place? Fighting bad guys is one of my best things.
You're milking this for all it's worth, but if the guy looks like Cary Grant, I'm good with that, okay? I stalled for time while I debated with myself.
To Catch a Thief. Good flick. Grace Kelly. Man, she was one fine filly.
I narrowed my eyes at him, and he gave me a lopsided grin. Perhaps not the best night to poke this rattlesnake, I said, as I tried to make sense of my whirling emotions. But fear finally prevailed over good sense. Okay, you can come up, but only to check under the bed and in the closets. Deal?
Scout's honor.
He made a crossing motion over his chest. The elevator deposited us in the center of my great room.
Nice digs,
Dane said as he drank it all in.
Sort of minimalist, though, don't you think?
A large space with white walls, an occasional splash of art, pastels depicting the many moods of the Mojave, bright furniture dotting the hardwood floor, and little else. I could see why he would call it minimalist. To me, it was uncluttered, and I liked it that way. A huge space in which to breathe.
Where have you been, bitch?
A familiar voice rang out, startling Dane.
Who's here?
Just Newton. I grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the kitchen. Come, let me introduce you.
You didn't tell me anyone would be here.
You didn't ask. When Newton caught sight of me, he shouted,
Asshole!
An expression of true love if there ever was one. Newton is my one foray into pet ownership, a foul-mouthed, vividly hued macaw. The service that came in twice a day to feed him had apparently forgotten to cover his cage. The bird danced in delight, muttering,
Bitch, bitch, I'm gonna smack you.
As you can tell, Newton had a very sketchy upbringing. I'm trying to teach him better manners, but parrots are like old dogs and elephants. Dane picked up a piece of browned apple from the dish beside the cage and stuffed it through the bars. Watch your fingers. Newton eyed him warily.
Asshole!
Shouted the bird. Then, like a snake snagging a mouse, he grabbed the apple and retreated to the far side of the cage with his prize.
I never took you to be a pet owner,
Dane said as he watched the bird. Newton picked me. After hearing his vocabulary, I had to keep him. I threw the cover over the cage. You're supposed to be checking all the dark corners for bad men, remember? The bedrooms are that way. I let Dane explore by himself. Tonight had been filled with awkward moments, and I couldn't stomach one more. The one where I stood there introducing him to my bedroom and boudoir. He returned shortly, shaking his head.
No bad guys.
If he noticed Teddie's sacks in the corner, his clothes in the closet, or his shaving stuff on the bathroom counter, he was too polite to mention them.
I guess you're safe for now.
Darn. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then he said,
I better shove off.
Right. I handed him back his blazer and walked him to the elevator. While we waited, he turned to me. Putting a hand on each of my shoulders, he looked me in the eye, a serious expression on his face.
Don't you ever wonder?
I touched my lips with 2 fingers, then pressed them to his. His skin felt hot to my touch. all the time. Dane left me alone with my wonderings. Pummeled by the day, I was too exhausted to think, yet too juiced to sleep, so I dragged my sorry carcass to the shower. After a session in front of massaging jets, the water set on scald, my muscles started to relax, the day drifting away with the steam. I had barely slipped between the sheets, luxuriating in the sensual feel of 1400-count Egyptian cotton and the downy embrace of a feather mattress, when the telephone rang. Thankfully, I had tossed the thing on my nightstand, because I wasn't getting out of bed, even if the high priestess and keeper of the secrets of the cult of multiple orgasms was calling. Clearly, I needed to work on my priorities. O'Toole. I pressed the thing to my ear, but didn't open my eyes. Are you naked? The familiar voice sent warmth shooting to my core. Who needed the secrets of the cult when they had someone like Teddie? Completely, I purred, trying my best to sound sexy. Are you? No, and since I'm eating brunch at a wonderful brasserie on the left bank, that is probably a good thing. I'd be arrested. Not on the left bank. What are you eating? Most couples in the throes of new love had phone sex when apart. Teddie and I had food sex. I started with onion soup, real French onion soup, made from scratch with just a whiff of tarragon. The cheese so fresh I could almost hear the cows. I groaned. You're killing me. What next? I couldn't remember my last meal. Then a croissant with fresh strawberry preserves and an omelet, the eggs whipped to perfection with a hint of basil and rosemary, accompanied by a nice Pinot Blanc from Alsace. Don't they shoot you for drinking anything other than Chardonnay in Paris? Kindly, they've let me live. I heard the distance between us in the hollow echo on the line. I miss holding you, he said. Me too. I gripped the phone and closed my eyes tight, squeezing back the tears. I hope to hell you're having a great time, because sleeping in this bed, with nothing but the memories of your touch to keep me warm, is no fun at all. It's like trying to sleep in a haunted house. Oh man, Lucky, you wouldn't believe all the stuff that's happening, Teddie said, deftly sidestepping my implicit begging for some morsel, some hint that somehow we were going to work out this tortured thing between us. His voice brightened, burbling with happiness. Why did that hurt my heart so bad? The audiences have been amazing. They actually listen to my stuff now. The energy is intoxicating. That's great, I said, only half meaning it, then felt guilty for not wanting the world for him. Well, actually I did want the world for him. I just wanted the world to be me. Yeah, they've extended the tour a bit, given me more exposure, a larger part to play. Reza and I are even putting together a duet. Teddie opened for Reza Pashiri, the current flavor of the month in Popville. She had a rabid following worldwide, so Teddie couldn't have found a better team to hitch his wagon to. And your music? Are you writing any songs? That had been Teddie's original dream, our original dream, and the one I helped him with, until he'd been seduced by the dark side. I don't have time. That's a real shame. You're brilliant. If I sent you a ticket, do you think you could meet me in Paris? It's the romance capital of the world, and the food isn't too bad either. I couldn't think of anything I'd like more than to share the city of lights with Teddie. When? Today? Today for you is tomorrow for me, right? Right, I think. But I meant as soon as you can. I thought about the coming weekend. My plate was full. With a sinking heart, I realized there was no way. It's Halloween. I'm in charge of the bondage ball and the Houdini seance. We have the UFO crowd in the hotel, and I'm VIPing a group of magicians. I have to finalize the plans for the restaurant at the new hotel with Jean-Charles. Construction starts in a couple of days, and I'm missing a magician. Teddie chuckled. It wasn't a happy chuckle, but more of a resigned, I knew you would turn me down kind of chuckle. I figured, but I thought I'd ask. Pretty funny when you think about it. I didn't share his humor. In fact, I thought the whole thing very sad. Très tragique, even. How so?
Not funny, really? Ironic, if anything.
I sowed the seeds of my own destruction.
A bit melodramatic, but close to the mark.
Teddie, I started, then paused. Needing time to search for some elusive courage, I pushed myself up in bed and plumped the pillows behind me. Dane had been wrong. I sure as hell needed a strong dose, and courage wasn't cooperating. I took a deep breath. Is there an us anymore?
Of course,
he said with a snort, as if my IQ had plummeted. But it's not the same, I pressed, surprising myself with a hint of backbone, or maybe it was desperation, who knew. Clutching at straws, I went with it. We need to talk.
Not over the phone.
His voice held defeat.
Please come.
I can't.
Then we'll have to shelve this conversation until later.
The hollowness echoed in the silence between us.
Lucky, I gotta go,
Teddie said, his voice brusque.
We've got rehearsal in an hour.
Teddie.
Later.
Fine. My anger seethed, but probably the only thing I knew about men for a fact was, if I tried to make them do something they didn't want to, they would go out of their way to make my life miserable. And right now, I was miserable enough. Be safe, Teddie. And be very, very careful.